Welcome to the lecture for Chapter 10. This chapter looks at conflict management and dealing with issues, risks, and crises. It is guaranteed that at some point in your career as a PR professional, you will encounter a crisis. Although you can't always prevent a crisis from happening, you can learn how to be proactive so you're ready to act when one occurs. Let's begin the lecture by looking at how conflict management works in competition and conflict. Conflict can take many forms, including competition between organizations and conflict between organizations and their publics. PR has a role in managing both competition and conflict. PR allows organizations to compete for limited resources, such as customers, volunteers, employees, donations, etc., and to engage in healthy conflict with others who have opposing views. The textbook offers two definitions for competition and conflict. Competition is defined as occurring when two or more groups or organizations vie for the same resources. Conflict is defined as occurring when two groups direct their efforts against each other, devising communication and actions that attack. For every conflict, a PR professional must decide what stance the organization will take to the public or stakeholder involved in a conflict situation. The stance you take will determine your strategy, and the stance always depends on various factors. One way to assess the threat to an organization is the threat appraisal model that can be viewed on page 255. A threat to an organization requires an assessment of the demands that threat makes on the organization, as well as what resources are available to deal with the threat. Once a threat is identified, the PR professional has to consider two major factors. One is organizational and one is situational. Once that is determined, the PR professional can determine the resources needed to combat the threat. Because a PR stance can change as a crisis unfolds, it is important to be as flexible as possible when the events do unfold. This flexibility is illustrated by the contingency continuum. The contingency continuum is a second model that offers PR professionals ways to handle crises or threats. This continuum offers a range of how organizations can respond to a crisis that go from pure advocacy to pure accommodation. Pure advocacy is a hard-nosed stance of completely disagreeing or refuting the arguments, claims, or threats of a competitor or a group concerned about an issue. Pure accommodation occurs when a company agrees with its critics, changes its policies, makes restitution, or even makes a full public apology for its actions. Take a look at page 257 to view the contingency continuum. Within public relations, conflict management should be thought of as a cycle that has a beginning, a middle, and an end that leads right back to the beginning. There are 4 phases to how managing a conflict functions: proactive, strategic, reactive, and recovery. We'll now go through each of these 4 stages. The first stage of the conflict management life cycle is being proactive. The proactive stage is where a PR professional thinks of activities and concepts that can prevent a conflict from arising or getting out of hand. There are several strategies to being proactive. The first strategy is environmental scanning. This is the constant reading, listening, and watching of current affairs with an eye to the organization's interests. The second strategy is issues tracking. This is when the PR professional analyzes what is being written about in papers so the PR professional can focus more intently on an issue. There is also issues management, and this occurs when the organization makes behavioral changes or creates strategic plans in ways that address the emerging situation. The best organizations will have a crisis plan that prepares a company to deal with a crisis as it develops. Also, companies can use a strategy called stealing thunder. Stealing thunder occurs when an organization discloses its crisis before it is discovered by the media. The second stage of the cycle is the strategic phase. This is where an emerging conflict is identified as needing concerted action by the public relations professional. There are 3 things that can be done during this stage. The first is risk communication, and this is when the PR professional identifies dangers or threats to the people or organization, and they are conveyed to forestall personal injury, health problems, or environmental damage. A second strategy is conflict positioning. This strategy enables an organization to position itself favorably in anticipation of activities or actions such as litigation, boycott, adverse legislation, elections, or similar events that will play out in the court of public opinion. The third stage of the cycle is the reactive stage. This occurs when the issue turns from an emerging conflict to a critical level of impact. The PR professional must react to events through external communication as they unfold. This can require 24/7 efforts to meet the needs of all of the publics involved. If a conflict is not out of control, you can use conflict negotiation techniques to assist negotiation or arbitration efforts to resolve the conflict. The final stage of the cycle is the recovery stage. After a crisis, an organization should use strategies that bolster or repair its reputation. Reputation management includes systematic research to learn the state of the organization's reputation and then take steps to improve it. Once a PR practitioner is done with recovery, they are brought back to the beginning of the cycle, the proactive stage. When you are back in this stage, this is where a PR practitioner needs to conduct environmental scanning to ensure a conflict doesn't reemerge as an issue. There are 4 systematic processes that PR professionals can use to manage competition and conflict. They are issues management, conflict positioning and risk communication, crisis management, and reputation management. We'll now go into each of these. Issues management is a proactive and systematic approach to predict problems, anticipate threats, minimize surprises, resolve issues, and prevent crises. When engaging in issues management, the textbook recommends going through 3 processes. The first is utilizing strategy options. Strategy options is when a company weighs all the pros and cons of various options and decides which is the most economical and practical. Another strategy is developing an action plan. Once a specific option is chosen, it needs to be turned into an action plan that is communicated to all publics involved. And the last part of issues management is evaluation. Once the new policy is in place and effectively communicated, you have to evaluate the results. A second way to manage competition and conflict is conflict positioning. Conflict positioning is defined as any verbal or written exchange that attempts to communicate information that positions the organization favorably regarding competition or an anticipated conflict. Examples of this include conducting a product recall if there is an issue or health concern with a product, or reducing executive pay if a company lays off workers. A third way to manage competition and conflict is through crisis management. No matter how well you conduct the conflict management process, sometimes major issues turn into high-profile crises. A crisis is defined as a major occurrence with a potentially negative outcome affecting the organization, company, or industry, as well as its publics, products, services, or good name. The textbook offers varying strategies for ways to respond to a crisis. The first strategy is to attack the accuser, and this is when the organization attacks whomever claims a crisis exists, and sometimes a lawsuit is threatened. A second strategy is denial. This is when an organization explains that there simply is no crisis. A third strategy is to offer an excuse. This is when an organization minimizes responsibility by stating that they had no control over the events. The fourth strategy could be justification. This is when a crisis is minimized with a statement that no serious damage or injuries resulted. A fifth strategy is ingratiation, and this is when actions such as giving coupons or making a donation are done to appease the publics involved. The sixth strategy is corrective action, and this is when steps are taken to repair the damage from the crisis and to prevent it from happening again. And finally, a seventh strategy is to offer a full apology. This is when an organization takes responsibility and asks for forgiveness. It is important to realize that the strategy used depends on the type of crisis an organization experiences. A fourth way to manage competition and conflict is through reputation management. Reputation is defined as the collective representation of an organization's past performance that describes the firm's ability to deliver valued outcomes to multiple stakeholders. A reputation for organizations is based on economic performance, social responsiveness, and the ability to deliver valuable outcomes to stakeholders. It takes about 3 years for an organization to recover from a crisis that damages a reputation. The textbook offers several ways to recover a reputation. The organization can make their progress or recovery visible. They can analyze what went wrong, improve governance structure, make the CEO and leadership accessible to the media, or even fire employees involved in the problem. They can commit to high corporate citizenship standards, carefully review ethics policies, hire outside auditors for internal audits, and/or issue an apology from the CEO. This completes the lecture for Chapter 10. Today we covered crises and how public relations practitioners deal with them. Crises tend to follow a standard cycle, and there are strategies to implement at each stage. It is important to be aware of the stages and strategies so you can effectively handle whatever crises come your way. Thank you for listening.